Dan Rubenstein, and we have the first final in our series of 4 college football playoff quarterfinal games, this being on New Year's Eve, this being our last video of 2025. Believe it or not, Miami knocks off the defending champions, the Ohio State Buckeyes, by a 24-14 score. They entered this game as a 9.5-point dog. They emerge as a 10-point victor. This will certainly send some shockwaves as we embark upon the other 3 games in the college football playoff quarterfinal action. Dan, wow, what a way to kick things off, huh?
Yes, an unbelievable win for Miami, covering Ohio State's spread, right? That they win this game by at least 9.5 points. A terrific performance, an overwhelming performance at times for Miami. Slow start, no score after the first quarter. Both of these quarterbacks look a little bit slow out of the gates. Certainly Julian Sayin did. We talked a lot about, as everybody did, the Miami ability along their defensive line to hound and overwhelm and harass, and they were violent. The entirety of this game, they were violent. And Ohio State did succeed at times, definitely on offense. But if there's one specific story of this game, it is the Miami defense. And I don't know how you could argue otherwise, but look, doesn't feel so great having the long bye time off, does it, Ohio State? Doesn't feel so good. Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit of field there, Ty. Watching this game, watching Miami make the plays, doing just enough to keep chains rolling, to play smart, efficient football after what I thought was a bad call on 3rd and short deep in Ohio State territory relatively early on, when Ohio State knows that they're going to be running the ball on 3rd and 3 straight up the gut. They force a fumble from Mark Fletcher. And Miami bounces back. They just keep getting stops on defense. They keep finding CJ Daniels open for 6, 7, 8 yards, right? That I thought he was low key one of the most valuable players in this game. There's a few of those guys that are not going to be the first names to jump out when you think about Miami football success, like Charmar Brown at the end of that game, getting those tough yards, setting up success. And obviously Mark Fletcher. Malachi Toney didn't do a lot, actually fumbled the ball twice. Caleb Downs, I think, forced 2 Malachi Toney fumbles, but the ball bounced the right way for Miami. But I'm all over the place a little bit, but what Miami was able to do on defense in harassing Julian Sayin, even when they were absorbing extraordinary Jeremiah Smith plays, performances, catches, whatever, the single best thing in this game was Miami on defense. And I don't know how anybody could argue otherwise, other than maybe Jeremiah Smith's individual effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we need to focus the attention. By the way, as I'm watching the first half of this game, I'm kicking myself.
Yeah.
Because I had, and I mentioned this on the preview, I had myself at one point in the build-up to this one convinced that I should be taking Miami.
Yeah.
Convinced that they were the team that was coming in with momentum.
Yep.
Convinced that the rust factor that we saw last year, and we didn't know how it would manifest this year. By the way, teams coming off the bye now in the playoff, we'll see how it materializes on New Year's Day. 0-5, as we are now in this 12-team era. But you'll recall, and we both discussed it when we did our preview, how Ohio State was going to deal with that pressure up front was going to dictate a lot of this game.
Yeah.
And that could not have been more true. It wasn't necessarily a secret. Anybody who's watched Miami all year knew that the combination of Akeem Mesidor and Reuben Bain Jr. were going to be an issue. They've been an issue all season long. But the way that they deployed those guys right out of the jump, they showed the play early on, right? You saw a couple replays of it. They're lined up on the same side. There was no denying from the jump that this was going to be a problem for Ohio State. I didn't see the final tally on sacks, but for sure, they got after the quarterback. And even if they weren't bringing Julian Sayin down, they were in his face.
Right.
They were speeding him up. They were definitely affecting the play, and they were not giving him a clean pocket to throw out of. And that, I think, to your point, above all else, is where we need to start the conversation for Miami.
Yeah.
What they did defensively was really inspired, and that was what dictated the pace of this game. If we've turned the page a little bit and flipped to the other side of the ball on the Ohio State side of things, there's definitely a question that needs to be asked about what their strategy was for covering the Miami passing attack. Granted, Mark Fletcher had some hard yards, and Shamar Brown, as you said, later in the game had some hard yards as well, both on the ground and that nice little swing pass.
Yes.
Out of the backfield, I think, to convert a big third down. But they were playing off coverage for a good chunk of that game. It wasn't until, I don't know, 5 minutes into the second half that we started seeing them man up a little bit more, play a little bit tighter on Miami receivers. I had tweeted out a stat that through 3.5 quarters or near the end of the third quarter, Carson Beck had only thrown one ball longer than 12 air yards. This was not necessarily a passing attack on the Miami side that was trying to stretch anybody deep.
No, and you know what? It wasn't there. Like they took what was there to the best of their ability.
Absolutely.
Didn't force. There were not interceptable balls either, right? There were the passes that Carson Beck sort of let fly were largely not anywhere near danger, right? There, it's a lot of horizontal stuff. It's a lot of shorter stuff. It's a lot of like, this is the read, get it to him quickly. Should also point out, Miami absorbed probably at least 2 pass interference non-calls, right?
Yeah.
The Devin Sanchez one down the field, Jeremiah Smith, full extension, OPI not called on a big gain or like a 22 yard gain as well. But no, on offense for Miami, they weren't taking shots and chances haphazardly. And so credit to Shannon Dawson, credit to Carson Beck, credit the game plan, credit the protection for Miami, because Carson Beck largely was not, harassed and harangued, however you want to say it. And so Mark Fletcher ran well. That he didn't bust as many long runs, but busted enough long runs and like turned 3-yarders into like 8-9-yarder types, like more often than he probably should have. And so, look, this is against what's arguably the best defense in America, and what Miami was able to do. Got a couple of the breaks, as we mentioned, with Malachi Toney dropping those, or having the ball jostled out of his arms a couple times. But no, the red zone, the play call on that first touchdown, the sort of like weak side.
It was Tebow-esque, wasn't it? The little stutter step, like maybe he's going to run up the gut, and then suddenly the swing out to Fletcher.
It wasn't the jump pass. It was the like little flip swing to the weak side.
I love that play.
Great execution.
I love that play
call after a great drive. That was a settled in drive for Miami after the slow start. And then we've gone this far without mentioning the absolute brilliant Keontae Scott jump into the lane 80-yard house call pick 6.
And by the way, we could talk a good game about Jeremiah Smith, who had 7 grabs for 157 yards and a touchdown, and is still largely uncoverable by anybody in college football.
Totally.
Full stop. Also, whiffed on that block.
Yeah.
Whiffed on that block. Miami defender shoots through, catches it like he's the intended receiver, runs 72 yards for a pick 6 to make it 14-0 early on. Now, Ohio State, to their credit, did come back a little bit. They were able to reestablish some momentum. There was a definite moment in the second half of this game where you and I were messaging back and forth, like, is this going to happen here? We've seen this before with Miami where they've got a lead and then something. This wasn't like a classic Cristobal game where he's playing uber conservative and giving the game away, but you could feel at a point in this one where the momentum was shifting a bit in favor of Ohio State. Yeah. But again, Miami, to their credit, was able to recapture it. I do want to come back to something else that you mentioned about Carson Beck.
Please.
How much of the narrative in the buildup to this one was about Carson Beck, and you can confuse him, and he's got a big mistake in him, and you messaged me about it in the second half.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a back-breaking Carson Beck turnover, isn't there? ...
No, he played within himself. By the way, just in terms of complimenting Carson Beck, I don't think it ultimately ended in points on that drive, but the 3rd and 11 run where he scrambles and absolutely
put his shoulder down,
lowers his shoulder and wrecks a couple of Ohio. Maybe that's too strong a term, but bowls over and gets, he's hit, a couple yards short, and uses his momentum to sort of collide through and get to the first down in a conversion. And it was just a gutty play, knowing that every one of these players on both sides needed to give everything they had. And so, Miami closing out the game the way that they did. And even with the interception at the end of the game, right, that they weren't phased. It was under a minute for Ohio State when they got the ball back after they let Miami in for that late touchdown. But this was a 17-14 game. Like, you could feel a little bit of Miami tightening up, not fully.
No.
But when Ohio State started moving the ball, Bo Jackson was running it well. Julian Sayin was getting rid of the ball quicker and quicker, and he was finding Kazmarek and Brandon Inniss and Carnell Tate, obviously Jeremiah Smith. There was momentum there. Ohio State was finding chunks of yardage, and obviously the Jeremiah Smith touchdown late was a brilliant play by him, but Miami stayed the course.
They stayed the course.
Nice job.
And my point on Beck is we saw this as the best version of him when he was still at Georgia.
Yeah.
Now, it might have been more of a supporting cast thing, and those Georgia teams were able to run the ball really effectively, much more so than they have recently. But the best of Carson Beck, when people were talking up Carson Beck as a potential top 10 pick in the NFL draft, way back when, feels like an eternity ago.
Yeah.
Those were teams that didn't rely on Carson Beck to go out there and throw for 350 yards. Those were teams that had a good supporting cast around him, and they relied on him to not make a big mistake. I hesitate to call game manager, but a little bit of game manager with the way that they've used quarterbacks at Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And Carson Beck, the best version of him before he came over to Miami, was that guy. And we saw, I think, a lot of that in this game. We saw some of that in the game prior. The stat line here is not going to knock anybody over. 19 completions on 26 attempts, just 138 yards. I think he had 100 yards passing a week ago.
Yeah.
But this
stat
version of
Julian
him
Sayin literally knocked Julian Sayin over, though. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm really impressed by the effort we saw out of him, even though it's not going to jump off the box score at anybody. No. I'm really impressed by the inspired defensive effort that we saw on the Miami side of things. And I would just say, more broadly speaking, my big takeaway is that this is a Miami team that is now playing with a lot of momentum.
Yeah.
They're playing with a lot of momentum. They believe. There is a storyline that emerges 3 weeks down the road of them playing a home game potentially for the national championship, which is, well, we'll get there when we get there. But there's also another storyline that could emerge on January 2nd, that being Carson Beck against his former team in the Georgia Bulldogs, depending on who wins that Ole Miss Georgia game. So as if ever there were going to be a shortage of storylines, that was never going to be the case, regardless of who won this game. But I think it is even richer on the Miami side now, given it's been a drought since they were here. And I'm excited for Miami fans that watch our stuff, that listen to our stuff, that have been commenting since the jump about what they thought the Canes could be this season.
CANES.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for that fan base to now have something to be excited about. And
sure,
they're going to be in the Final Four. It's pretty cool.
So a couple stray thoughts here as well. That pick six was the game. Ultimately, in retrospect, right? Miami just beat Ohio State, scoring 2 offensive touchdowns. That's a very difficult thing to do unless you're also Indiana, right? Like, the idea of Ohio State, with the amount of firepower they have at their best, scoring, only giving up 2 offensive touchdowns and still losing that game, is pretty wild, considering where they've been this season, where they've been recently with a lot of these players. And, I thought a little bit about how Miami didn't do a ton that will wow you, but they did the right things at the right time. I think they ended up going 8 of 15 on 3rd and 4th downs. Like, there were 3rd and 4s, 3rd and 6s. We mentioned the 3rd and 11 that ultimately didn't end in points, but what does that do? That takes time away from Ohio State, right? Relining up the sticks. And so the 3rd down play calling was really good. The execution, just, again, right place, right time. I thought about what I was trying to say before. I thought about, like, teams in baseball who are really good at the shift, right? They're just like, we have a plan for this guy. We have a plan for this moment. And Miami just looked locked in. And I don't know if that's a combination of them obviously being very, very good, them playing a game recently, and more recently than Ohio State. And you mentioned the 0-5 after these long stretches. So tomorrow, good luck to, it would be Georgia, Texas Tech, and Indiana trying to break that streak. But it was just a really well-run game from Miami. And it's going to be a long off season for Ohio State and trying to figure out things, I guess, along the offensive line, patching a couple holes up on defense. The defense clearly not the issue, but maybe 3rd down play calling and execution is the issue in these higher leverage moments against the top teams potentially faced in December and January. It looked like at times, like the Ohio State offensive line got there by winning like an essay contest, that they just didn't naturally belong on the field. And to be fair, very few offensive linemen, if any, have looked like they've belonged on the field against this Miami defensive front this season. So good luck to whoever Miami has next. I guess it's the winner of Georgia, Ole Miss.
Yep.
Tomorrow. Those are two lines that are beat up and have not been perfect this season. So good luck. But you tip your cap to Miami, who was basically not going to make this field, except for the committee deciding after a few weeks of having Notre Dame ranked ahead of them to flip it.
Hey, good for them. Good
Miami
for them.
was always a playoff caliber team, to be clear.
Absolutely. And, just to kind of put a bow on the Ohio State conversation, we have spent hours deliberating the Ohio State just general approach this season. They had played slower. There were different nuances to how they went about this season, and there had been a lot of speculation that they're doing this, they're playing slower, they're reducing the number of plays that they run because they're in this for the long haul. They want to preserve their players' health, right? A whole multitude of reasons that were floating around out there. I don't know if any of that's true. I have no idea. But what I do know is it's a game like this where you expect them, or maybe a game like the Big Ten Championship where you expect them to sort of flip the switch. And there is like this false promise that I think we have all too often believed in college football, where teams at some point have it in them to just flip that magical switch. I thought about that with Penn State last year. Drew Aller in the offense. At some point, the switch is gonna flip, and then we're gonna see the real version of them. Now, Ohio State did flip a switch last year. It took them losing to Michigan before they got to that point, and then they went on this torrid pace.
But they didn't get a month off to think about it. Yeah.
Right. And so there will be much speculation, and I'm sure much conjecture in the Ohio State community about how they approach this game, and if the loss is on the interception, if the loss is on the staff, if the loss is on some combination of all of those things.
Yes.
But if we were waiting for the answer to the question of whether Ohio State had a switch that they could flip in a big game like this, the answer in this case was definitively no.
Right. Yeah. Look, they weren't able to turn to the Oregon brain trust of Chip Kelly this season, right? That hurt them.
No, it's just a different team, man. It was a different
team. It's a different situation.
Yeah.
And look, Ohio State losing to Michigan last year changed the complexion of the playoff. And now Ohio State losing after a long time off will probably result in more changes to the playoff and the amount of time teams get off or whatever, because you can't have it, I guess.
This is how you get to 16. This is how you get to 16 teams, because teams are going to be afraid of the bye, despite what coaches say about how they like it. They get that extra week to recuperate, whatever. 0-5 now to start off the 12-team playoff era. We will see what happens on January 1, 2026. But as such, we close out 2025 with a win for the Miami Hurricanes. Michael Irvin was losing his mind.
Ray Lewis,
I floated something out there that we just need a Michael Irvin cast next week. Like, just do it. Put it on the ACC network. Give us a reason to watch the ACC network. Just watch him lose his mind for 60 straight minutes. Who's not watching that?
I think the FCC and the Michael Irvin network might run into some issues with each other if you're going to mic them up and put them on live television. But either way,
man. Big night for Miami, right?
Tip of the cap, by the way, Mario Cristobal, right? This is the biggest win for Miami in 20 plus years. They played Mario Ball, the best version of Mario Ball. He had a great quote, I think, in one of his sideline interviews where he was just like, we just want each of our guys to kick the ass of the guy in front of them, and we feel good about that.
Yeah.
And they did it, right? He's recruited this roster. The portal worked out really well. Keontae Scott was almost, I think, a Houston Cougar. He was at Auburn, went to Houston, ended up at Miami following a DB's coach. Like, a lot came together to make this work for Miami, and they bounced back after losing those games to SMU and Louisville pretty masterfully. and to go to Texas A&M and then stay within the state of Texas and do this to Ohio State and Jerry World. It's a stage they haven't been on in a long time, and they more than rose to the occasion.
Why don't we leave it there? Again, your final, Miami 24, the Ohio State Buckeyes, the defending champion Ohio State Buckeyes 14. Miami is moving on to the college football playoff semifinal. This is our last video of 2025. So wherever
we have an hour 40
be,
to do, we can do something else. We have an hour 40. Or no, you only have 40 minutes left. Excuse me.
Wherever
Yes.
you may be, Happy New Year. We'll catch you on the flip side. I'm Ty. He's Dan. You know the drill. Stay solid.
Peace.